Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Gomes with Job Service Kalispell, and welcome to our September Blueprint for Business Success seminar. Please take a moment to help us identify the businesses benefiting from today's seminar by entering the business you represent in the chat box. We do ask that you please be polite and respectful to all attendees and the presenter. Attendees are muted during the seminar, but we encourage you to use the chat box for asking questions, which will be answered at the end of the presentation. Completing the 2-minute anonymous survey at the end of the seminar will help us improve this program and provide meaningful topics and content. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from Ronda Wakefield as she presents on the topic of hiring, onboarding, and job descriptions. She brings a wealth of experience and expertise in the field of human resources. Ronda is a Society for Human Resource Management Senior Certified Professional and holds the Senior Professional in Human Resources Certificate. With over 18 years experience in all HR industries, she works with organizations across Montana and several other states as a human resource consultant. Here is Ronda Wakefield.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. It's exciting to be back working with employers and HR professionals in the Flathead Valley. It's been a while, and even though it's virtual, it's great to be watching and communicating with everyone. It's even more exciting to be discussing something other than COVID. And this is my first Zoom presentation, so bear with me as I stumble through. I have lots of great help in the room, but if you have any questions or can't hear or something goes wrong, just put a comment in the chat box and these lovely ladies will get you going. So we're just going to jump right in. As the title of the presentation states, today we're going to spend our lunch hour talking about hiring, onboarding, and job descriptions. Each of the topics is a training in and of itself, so we're really going to be just touching on some best practices. We don't have time to get into all the details of each particular subject, but we're going to do a high-level view of it. And just gonna keep right on going, jumping in. As more as announcements for the presentation stated over the past few weeks, some of the key takeaways that we're gonna talk about today are how hiring, onboarding, and job descriptions are connected to help ensure a great candidate experience. That's kind of a buzzword now in the HR world, and we talk about what is that candidate experience, what does it look like? It's extremely important, and we'll talk about that more at the end. We're going to talk about how to develop and implement these pieces successfully and how creating that positive candidate experience contributes to engagement and retention. And we're really in a unique time right now. It's not often that we have so many people on unemployment, yet so many employers struggling to attract and retain great employees and great talent. So how do we work through that scenario and pull it together so it's successful for everybody? And today we'll focus on some of those, the best practices of that. So when we put this together, the title says hiring, onboarding, and job descriptions, but I like to flip it around a little bit. And I always think that starting with the job description is really where everything begins. I don't know how you can successfully hire the right person or onboard if you don't have that job description already in place. Now, if you're like me, writing job descriptions can be a very, very painful experience, but trust me, if you get that done in the very, very beginning, it's going to help you hire the right person. It's going to help your organization. We'll talk about how we can do that so it's not as painful and really effective. So we're just going to jump right into that piece. The importance of job descriptions, and think about this. How would you even write a help wanted ad if you don't have the job description? You need to know exactly what kind of person you're working for, or you're looking for, excuse me. So we find that we use that job description for the help wanted ad. We use it for recruiting. We use it to build interview questions. How many of you have sat down to interview someone and went, oh, I don't even have my questions prepared? And I think we should really be making sure that we're answering or asking those questions that we've addressed in that job description that went back to that help wanted ad. It helps us as we move forward hiring the right person, set the expectations for the employee. We want them to know exactly what we expect from them. How do we hold them accountable if we don't have that in writing somewhere and it's very clear and they know exactly what we're looking for? And I would ask all of you, think back to a time when you were looking at a help wanted ad, for example, and you looked at it and went, well, not really sure, do I fit that role? Can I do that? What does that look like? And that should ideally come right out of that position description. After we hire somebody, we're going to use that job description to rate performance. You should always have that job description handy during performance reviews and really just going down that checklist to see, are they meeting the expectations of each of these points that we asked them to be able to perform when we brought them in. It helps keep the employer on track with expectations. Think back as an employer, how many times do you get about 6 months down the line, maybe you're doing that 6-month review and you realize that new employee isn't doing anything that you hired them to do. And it's usually because we've recognized some of the other great talents that they have and we just start adding to them, or maybe we pull something away and give it to somebody else, but add something new onto this new employee's plate. So I find that it's a really good tool to help keep the employer on track with expectations. And then lastly, while we hope that it never has to be used for legal compliance, we do have that there. While maintaining a job description and having one isn't a law, you don't have to have it. It can really help keep your organization in compliance with many of the existing employment laws, especially if we get through and someone's just not performing in Montana because we have to show cause for that termination after the probationary period. This can be a really, really important document to have handy. And again, talking about some of the keys to a successful job description, I find, again, it's particularly painful to write a job description. And what I've learned over the years in working with a variety of employers, primarily across the state of Montana, a few other states too, but oftentimes I'll get a call from somebody saying, hey, can you help us recruit someone for this position? And I'm not in the industry, I'm not in the organization, so I really don't know what that expectation is, but I want to be able to help them write that effective job description. And so the first thing I look for is, what is the job? So many times anymore, and I think for a while it was kind of suggested that we're looking for that unicorn, or we're looking for that rock star. We don't want unicorns and rock stars anymore. We really need to be specific with that job title. What are we looking for? And as we go through in that job description, again, making sure that we have really specific and measurable expectations. Now, we might start with something kind of small and build on it. But again, what I learned and getting help with writing that effective job description was really talking to and building relationships with the people that were in that department, having them help me write that job description. They know what they need their coworkers to do. They are experienced in the role, and hopefully they're performing effectively. I like to get them involved in it. What are some of those key skills that you think this person coming in needs to have? Do they need to know how to read a tape measure? Do they need to have great math skills? Has that been a detriment or a help to you in that position? Or maybe it's not so important. But really bringing those people in and having them help with it is really, really helpful. We also want to review the performance of the departing employee, if there is one. Oftentimes I'll sit down with that employer or that manager and say, okay, let's think about the person who's leaving the role. Identify the top 3 skills that person had. What made them really, really good at that position? What did you just absolutely love about them in that role? Let's make sure we get that noted in that position description somewhere. And likewise, identify maybe the top 3 challenges that person had. Maybe it was, things that they just weren't good at. Maybe they did struggle with, maybe it was typing. And in the beginning, you didn't think it was going to be that critical, but it has ended up being something that you recognize as really, really pertinent to that position. And incorporate those skills and challenges in there and make sure that when you're interviewing and writing the job description, that you're addressing those things. The other thing I would suggest is that we remove anything that isn't pertinent. So many times I'll go back to an employer and say, no, is it really necessary that they have that degree? And let's take HR, for example. Do they have to have a degree in human resources, or does that SHRM certification or HRCI certification work just as well? Can it be an and or? Another one we see a lot is they have to have a valid driver's license. Well, do they really? Do they drive for that position? Do they need to be able to do that? If they're delivering parts or picking something up, absolutely. And we want to make sure that if you've got, a large fleet of vehicles in your organization and you're going to have different people driving them, that they do have that valid driver's license. More often than not, your insurance company is going to require that. But if it's the secretary who's going to sit and answer the phone all day long and just doing her job at the front door, honestly, we don't really care how she gets to work. That's her deal, as long as she gets there. Maybe grandma's bringing her, maybe she's walking. So that valid driver's license really isn't pertinent to that position. So really making sure that we're going back and checking when we've got those requirements listed. Is it a requirement or is it a preferred? There's a difference there. One other thing that I would point out in this particular segment is if you're requiring that in the job description and you end up hiring someone that doesn't have that specific requirement and several other people applied as well and didn't have the requirement but didn't get the job, you could get yourself in a little bit of trouble with that. So be very, very careful. If you're requiring a certain skill or a certification and the person you hire doesn't have that, you might want to change your wording on that and make sure you're documenting how you justified, hiring that person without that requirement. I'm going to bounce back one more time here. I apologize. And so just talking about that job description, there's a couple times that we want to make sure that we're looking at this job description. I always say review it when you are getting ready to hire someone. Review it again at that 6-month performance review. Pull it out and sit down with that employee and make sure that that job description is accurate to the tasks and things that you actually have them doing. So it shouldn't be something that just gets stuck in the HR department's drawer. Many people say, well, I think we have a job description somewhere, not really sure. That should be a really, really key piece to everything you do to helping your employees be successful. So now let's jump into the hiring process a little bit. And there's some duplication here between the hiring process and the job descriptions. And then as we go into onboarding, and you'll see that, again, they just flow together. And many organizations will call part of this, well, we call that part of our hiring process, or that's part of our onboarding process. That's okay as long as you have these key pieces in here, but you'll see how they do all tie together and they really impact each other. So when we talk about that hiring process and the steps in that, the first thing we're going to do is identify the vacancy. John quit. Do we really need to refill that position? Sometimes we don't. Maybe we have people on staff that can take that. Maybe we're downsizing. Right now, it's a challenging time with COVID. Do we have other people who can pick up some of those roles? And we don't necessarily have to fill that position right now. But we've identified that we do need to hire and fill that position. So we've identified the vacancy. Then we're going to develop and revise that job description. We're going to hear that repeatedly over and over. I can't speak to the job description or position description enough. So we're going to make sure that we have that. We're going to develop those interview questions that we talked about before already with that job description. Build your interview questions right off that job description. Have you ever sat through an interview where you looked at the job description and you felt really, really comfortable that you were a great fit for that position, but the questions were just way out in left field and didn't pertain to that job description? So make sure they match up. You're going to develop that recruitment plan. Who's going to be a part of it? Is it your internal HR department? Is it one of our lovely staffing services that's going to help you out with that? They need to know. Similar to myself, I do a lot of recruiting, but I need to know what really is pertinent for this person. It's hard. We can talk about skills and personality is very, very difficult for those of us who aren't on site in that organization. We can't really gauge the culture. Hopefully we've learned a little bit about it, but making sure that we have a specific recruitment plan and knowing who is in charge of that, who is really responsible for bringing those great employees in. We're going to select the hiring committee. Maybe it's the HR person, the department manager, and the supervisor. Not just one person is in charge of interviewing and hiring this person. It's always great to have different points of view. And I think it's a great experience for supervisors as well to include them in that process so they know what we're looking for and they know and gauge the different personalities. More than likely, that's the person that they're going to be reporting directly to. So does it look like they can play nice together? Then we're going to post the job. Don't forget about posting internally. We have some great candidates internally. Wouldn't we rather have someone move within our organization than lose them to another organization that may have that same type of opportunity? So make sure that you are including that. Maybe you post it internally 5 days ahead of time and give your current employees that opportunity. Then we're going to review the applicants. And I say, take it down to a short list. Maybe that's 5 candidates. And I personally have a pre-screening interview checklist that I go through, and it's either 5 to 6 questions that helps me develop that short list. If you've got 10 people that you really are thinking, I want all of them, that's going to be a challenge. So making sure that you're really then narrowing it down and getting it down to maybe those top 3 or top 5 candidates. And then conducting interviews. You might have a different interview questionnaire for your internal candidates than you do your external candidates. Internal people know a lot more about your organization, and so you might skip some of those questions, but you might talk to them about, what have you recognized? How do you feel you could really change that role? How could you really develop it and take it a step farther? Why should we hire you internally rather than bringing somebody in from the outside? So those are all good things to consider. And then the last part of that hiring process really is making that offer contingent upon pre-employment conditions. And I stress this heavily. You can make an offer and say, the offer is contingent upon you successfully passing the pre-employment drug screening. Maybe it's a background check, those positive references. And so I want to stop for a moment and focus on references. Right now is a really, really unique time, as we've already identified. There's so many jobs out there. And while I like to believe that most people are honest and want to do a good job, it's an employee's market. And it's a good opportunity for them to just job hop. And you're not even really checking, why did they leave their last job? Did they give a notice? What did that look like? Don't skip the references. I think you'll find that that is one of the most critical pieces to bringing on a great new employee. Now we're going to move into the onboarding piece. And so many times people would talk about, is onboarding the same thing as new employee orientation? It is not. While they're used interchangeably a couple times, onboarding is really different. And I think when I was talking on the radio interview yesterday, we talked about, I think it's 52% of new employees who come on through a structured onboarding process are more likely to make it for at least 3 years in the organization. That's huge. Onboarding is that process where new hires get adjusted to the social and performance aspects of their job quickly and smoothly. It really helps with that. They learn attitudes, knowledge, skills, and behaviors required to function effectively within that organization. And it's really that first picture they get of the culture in the organization. So we don't want to skip that part, and it flows. It's an overlap of that hiring process. Sometimes people say, well, is the hiring process part of onboarding? I would say it is, truly. It is definitely a piece that they just roll right into together. Maybe we've got right down to that new employee paperwork, and now we're going straight into the onboarding. A lot of companies right now are doing, because of virtual and remote onboarding, they're doing that new employee paperwork before the employee even starts. So they're not even there yet, but maybe they filled out their I-9 and you've processed some of that paperwork already. So it does start there. And we're going to touch briefly on remote and virtual onboarding. I know that it might not look like right here in the Flathead Valley we have so many of those types of positions, but there's more out there than we realized. And some positions fit really, really well virtually or remotely, others don't. If you're manufacturing and you're in charge of building widgets all day long, it's really difficult to have that be a remote position. But if it's an office position and we're doing everything we can to kind of keep as many people out of the building, we're practicing our social distancing, we want to look for those remote opportunities. And some key points and best practices for that remote and virtual onboarding. Number one, make sure that employee has the required technology. What does that background look like? Now you'll see the little picture I put in there. Hopefully we don't have people that are attending a meeting in their pajamas eating their cereal. Doesn't mean they can't be. We just don't want to necessarily know about it. But do they have an area that is free from distraction? Do they have all the tools? Do they have the printers and scanners? And do they have dual monitors? Do they have that external camera? Do they have everything they need to be successful technology-wise in that position? It's also really important to design a specific orientation schedule for onboarding. It's one thing to bring somebody into your organization and maybe somebody misses the meeting. Maybe it's that manager who's supposed to be doing the introduction and they don't show up. So the HR department jumps in and covers it. It happens, things happen. If somebody logs on to an online meeting and nobody's on the other end, that is not going to go over very well. So you really need to make sure that all the participants understand, kind of like today, we went through many walkthroughs of this presentation so that everybody knew their role and we knew how to make it work. We also had a backup plan in case those technically challenged people like myself got stuck. So make sure that you've got that all worked out for your virtual and remote onboarding. Communicating often is really important, whether it's an email every single day. Hey, what questions do you have? Or, do you have everything that you need? When we're on site, walking around our organization, we see people, hey, is everything going okay? Or they have the opportunity to jump up and run to that person that they might need help from. If this person's in another state or at home, they need to know who do they go to for help. So making sure that you're reaching out and communicating often is important. And then focusing on that engagement. How do we build engagement with employees who aren't there? How are they building relationships? So it's really, really important that you're making that a top priority of making sure that person feels welcome, that they feel like they're part of the team, even though they're located somewhere else. And then following up with those new hires, I recommend that we follow up with new hires internally, at that 1 week mark, that 2 week mark. I think with remote employees, it's important that we're following up with them almost every day, just making sure that they're doing okay in that first 2 weeks. How is it working out for them? And so I advanced the slide a little bit there early, but talking about, again, why is onboarding important? And I can share a personal experience with you. I worked for a really amazing manufacturing company here in the Flathead Valley for several years. And I can remember when I first started as the HR person, we didn't have a structured onboarding program, and people would come in, they would drop an application off at the front desk, and it would kind of get passed around, and maybe somebody would look at it and go, oh, they look like they have some electrical skills. Let's get this over to the electrical department. And we didn't have a great process. And over time, as we did more studying, I put a proposal together and went to the executive team and said, hey, let's give this a shot. And thankfully for me, they were very, very receptive to it. And I think until organizations understand that onboarding is like training, it's an investment. You can't look at it as an expense. And I do remember a couple times when people would say, oh, that's a full day, where you're pulling them away, time is money, that's non-productive time. Well, it really is very, very productive. And every year, 25% of the working population undergoes some type of career transition. Turnover is expensive. Those are real dollars. And I know I don't have to tell the HR professionals out in the audience that because you hear it over and over and over, but it's much more cost effective to retain employees than it is to rehire them. Employees get about 90 days to prove themselves in a new job. That's that first 3 months. The faster new employees feel welcome and new hires feel welcome and prepared for their jobs, the faster they're going to be able to successfully contribute. That all falls into that onboarding piece. What does that look like? Are you following up with them weekly and then monthly? And then at 45 days, and then again at 90 days, depending on your probationary period. And I do a lot of work with organizations here locally, and my specific job is just to reach out to new hires at certain milestones and benchmarks. Being an unbiased third party, we find that oftentimes those candidates will open up to me a little bit more, and they'll say, well, I'm struggling with communication, or I don't understand the direction, or we don't have specific processes. And at that point in time, I can jump back in and we talk about what does that look like to change that? What do we need to implement so that employee does feel successful and continues to move forward and is really a contributing member to that organization? They're a value add. And I think that, really during that first 45 days too, that's when people are really deciding, do I want to stay or do I want to go? Am I contributing or not? Do I need to be looking for something else? 4% of new hires leave a job after a disastrous first day. When we did our onboarding program at the manufacturing company, There were a couple times when we would actually we had a very structured new employee orientation, which is not to be confused with onboarding, it's a piece of it, but we had a very structured new employee orientation. And I found it a success if an employee, a brand new employee, came up in the middle of a, orientation, it was usually at lunch, and said, I don't think that this is the right organization for me. I was happy that they recognized that early on and, wish them well. If we could find them a different opportunity, we certainly would, but having that communication is important. We don't want people to just have such a bad first day that they just don't come back. That's not the same thing. 22% of turnover occurs within the first 45 days. So again, looking at those milestones with onboarding and what can we do to really communicate with those employees during that time? What does that onboarding piece look like? That costs the company at least 3 times the former employee's salary. And I know you'll look at different charts, and we all see different tools and resources out there online that talks about, what does that cost look like? And, you can do it whichever way you want to, but there is real dollars associated with that. And a successful onboarding program is hopefully going to help encourage retention. We want people to stay. As I mentioned before, it's much more cost effective to retain employees than it is to go through that termination process, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, and have to start all over again. Many of the HR professionals probably track metrics on how long it takes to hire. I think right now we're looking at, it used to be if you could find a really, really good person in a professional position, at that 4 to 6 week mark, you were doing really good. And I think it's much more extended right now. So we want to do everything we can to keep people. Engagement, I feel really, really strongly about engagement. People's ability to really want to be there and really want to be engaged and performing well, learning the organization, they are on track with the same goals, and it's their personal want and feeling to want to be engaged, not because the employer is forcing them to. It's something personal that comes within. And when we talk about engagement, that's what that looks like. And then performance. I think that everybody wants to do well for the most part. I truly believe that most people go to work every single day wanting to be a top contributor. They want to be a value add. But if you're recognizing that an employee isn't performing well, chances are they know it too. And it's important during that onboarding process that you're bringing that to their attention. I heard this a long time ago from a great HR mentor here in the Valley. Many of you know Bob Marcinich, and Bob said, you promote what you permit. And so if people's performance isn't where it needs to be, but you're just allowing that, you're not doing anybody any favors. So please make sure that you're monitoring that and communicating effectively and regularly. Real-time feedback is critical to new employees during that onboarding period, and them really making sure that they're top performers. Some onboarding milestones, and every organization might do it differently, and you're probably looking at this schedule going, are you crazy? Who has the time to reach out and touch base with a brand new employee, especially if we hired 5 people at the same time? This is a lot of work. And remember, we HR people love documentation. That's one of our favorite things. So every time you hit one of these milestones, you're going to document what that looks like. But if you have one sheet of paper, and maybe it's your onboarding piece of paper, maybe it just says onboarding milestones, and you have all of these dates planned out ahead of time. I use Outlook for it. You may have an HRIS system that notifies you, hey, Sally's been here, it's her 1-month anniversary. Run down to the floor and talk to her. Hey, Sally, how you doing? Reach out to her supervisor and say, how's she doing? But that personal touch is going to do so much for that new employee. The first day, of course, it could look like a couple different things. It might be that new employee orientation. It might be just a welcome, maybe it's a welcome gift that you leave on their desk, whatever that looks like, but please make sure you're doing that. And during that first 3 to 6 months, depending on what your probationary period looks like, some people have a 3-month, some people have a 6-month. Doesn't necessarily have to be tied to that. Maybe you don't have a probationary period at all. You still need to be checking in at that 3-month mark, 4-month. And what if they aren't performing? What if they aren't doing well? What does that look like? My recommendation is that it's accelerated, and you need to be touching them even more often, making sure, last week we talked about this. We're back to revisit that. What does it look like? How'd you do this week? Maybe it's attendance, maybe it's punctuality, maybe it's hitting those tack times, maybe it's producing, the expected amount of widgets that they're supposed to be doing, that's reasonable for somebody else that's come into the role and that you've established that. And of course, it's listed in that job description. And then at the end of the first year, what does that look like? Do you want to drag your onboarding out past that? You absolutely could. And maybe it's through performance reviews, whatever the case might be, but you should never stop that. Those are really, really critical pieces. So we're going to focus for just a minute. We don't want to look at the negative, but again, if we've got great job descriptions, we've went through a successful hiring process, we've done our due diligence with onboarding, hopefully we're not going to have to focus on this particular slide with the turnover. Right now, for more reasons than one, I don't want it to sound like it's all about the money either, but let's face it, we all have to have a profit in order for us to keep our jobs. And the cost of turnover is real. And you see some statistics there. Replacing an employee who earns less than $30,000 a year, which is not a very high number anymore, costs about 16% of his or her salary. If we're looking at that high executive, 75,000, that's about 20%. And if it's an executive level position, it can cost as much as 213% of that person's salary. So think about that. If nothing else, again, we don't want to just focus on the money piece. It's about the people, but this really can impact your organization. 50% of new hourly workers leave within the first 4 months. That's a staggering number. If you think about that and look at the number of people you might be looking to bring on next week, if you're looking to bring on 10 people because you've got a big project and you figure 5 of them are going to leave, the time, the effort, everything that you've put into that person, you're starting all over. That's huge. You're going to burn out your supervisors for sure, and your current workforce because they get tired of that turnover as well. 50% of all outside senior executive hires leave within the first 18 months. Not sure exactly why that is, but that's a high number. And so kind of getting ready to wrap it up here, let's talk about that positive candidate experience that I mentioned in the very, very beginning. If we've got those job descriptions, we've got that successful hiring place that's documented, it's in step, everybody understands it. These things all help create that positive candidate experience. And you might go out online, we've got Glassdoor, we've got Google Review, we've got all kinds of things, that social media that employers are faced with right now. We can't control what people put on those, but what we'd really like to see, even if that person didn't get the job, is that their experience with the company was good as they went through that process. They look at your website. Is it easy to maneuver? Is it attractive? Does it look like someplace that they'd like to work? We were visiting early morning that we did some interviews yesterday for a particular company here in the organization. And after the candidate went out and looked at the website, she got a really great idea of what that organization was all about, and realized that it really was very industrial, and that's not quite what she was looking for. And she got all that through the website, which I thought was great. She realized very quickly that that wasn't the right fit for her. They look at your job advertisements. Are they specific? Do they just say help wanted? Help wanted is kind of boring. We're looking for whatever you need to do, but they are looking at that. Is it, are they typed up nicely? Do they have a nice format? Is the punctuation and spelling there? Even though we might not think that's important, candidates look at those types of things. The online job application process, I left out purposefully, handing in that paper application. Some companies still do accept that. Certainly not saying that there's anything wrong with that. But if you go through and you're applying for a position and it's very cumbersome to get through that job application process, many times people will just give up. If you're in a manufacturing world or particularly, really focused on industrial where they're not used to sitting down and having those computer skills, it's not necessarily part of their daily job. If they can't make it through the job application, chances are you're losing out on some really, really great people. So make sure it's easy. Also make sure that you have something on there that says, if you're struggling, call us or send us an email. Here's how you can reach out to us. If they get communication from your applicant tracking system, I know the system I use sends an automatic response saying we've received it. What does that message look like? Does it say we will follow up with you? Does it say something more generic like if we think you might be the right candidate, we will be following up with you? Don't make promises you can't keep in here. If you say we'll reach out to you within 5 days and you can't do that, please don't put that in there. Make sure that it's doable and reasonable for you. What does your interview process look like? How many people get all the way to the interview? I don't know about any of you out there, but interviewing is particularly stressful. So many times we find that people will stay in jobs they don't like because they don't want to have to go through the interview process. I interview people every single day, yet the thought of having to be interviewed myself is painstaking. I don't like it at all. So make sure that your process is welcoming. Make sure that people feel comfortable. Make sure that they understand what's going to happen in that interview process. Communication with HR professionals, team members, and leadership. What does that look like? What does, whether it's emails or phone calls, how does that come together? Is it professional? Is it easy to understand? Is the communication regular? If it's not, maybe somebody got backed up, things happen, that you've explained that, that you've apologized, whatever the case may be, but make sure you're also sending a consistent message on behalf of the organization. That's important as well. I think so many times, especially if we get referrals, maybe we've got an employee that's already on staff and they're referring somebody and, that person comes in, well, Johnny said that all I had to do was come in and I could meet with you. I didn't know I had to schedule an appointment and have to go through the application process. So make sure your internal team knows what that looks like and you're all sharing the same message. Notifications about the candidate's application status. So this is something that can be very, very time consuming. Those of you sitting in your HR chairs right now are nodding your head saying, I wish I could communicate with every single person that applied. I remember when I first took what I call my real HR job, my first goal was I was going to communicate and respond to every single person that applied. And that lasted about a week. And I felt horrible because whether it was through email or that phone call, whatever the case may be, I could not keep up. So make sure though that you've got some sort of system in place. What does that look like? At least letting them know that you received their application, I think, is great. I have an applicant tracking system I use that I have to be very diligent in making sure that I maintain, and I have a calendar system for it that, when we filled the position, I at least let them know that the position has been filled. I thank them for their time. I wish them well. I'm always surprised at people that respond immediately and say, you know what, thank you so much for letting me know. I wondered what it was. And when somebody who has to reach out to me and say, hey, I haven't heard anything, I realize that I've missed a step, that I need to step up my communication a little bit and at least let them know what's going on, especially if it's somebody that you've had multiple conversations with, and then all of a sudden you just drop off the face of the earth. And it might be, oh, we put the position on hold, or we decided to fill it with an internal candidate, or we decided not to fill it at all. Let them know that so they understand that it's not necessarily something they did, but they know where they stand. If you talk to candidates about their candidate experience, the number one thing they will say is, well, I applied there and never heard anything. You have control over that. That's part of the candidate experience. And the Flathead Valley is very, very small. And so when people start talking about, oh, I applied there too and I never heard anything, oh, I applied and I got right in, whatever the case may be, make sure that the people that are out in the community, considering your place of employment, that they're having that good candidate experience. After you interview people, it's very, very important to notify those people that didn't get the job. I don't like this part. I think that when I get to, get it down to that short list, whether it's 3 or 5 people, 4 or 2 of them are going to have to get that notification from me that they didn't get the job. And how do you tell someone that? That's usually bad news. None of us want to have to share that information, but trust me, again, put yourself in that person's shoes. Don't you want to know that you didn't get the job? Sometimes they'll ask, can you tell me why? What could I work on? What could I have done differently? If you have that information and you can share it without causing a big issue, please do. Oftentimes it's just because there was somebody that had more experience or they found was a better fit for the role, but please make sure that you reach out to those people and let them know. Or maybe it's that person, hooray, we found that great new employee and we're going to get them a job offer. I challenge all of you to do job offers in writing. You don't have to create a brand new letter every single time. Have a template there that lists, when their starting date is, who they are going to report to, when that probationary period ends, what their benefits might look like, and when they're going to be eligible for benefits. There's a lot of information. It's like drinking from a fire hose, even for those of us on the end of HR, all the things that we have to process. So put yourself in that candidate's shoes. What do they need to know? And that job offer can help you in so many different ways. And, you know, it could be that at the very end of the first year, you're pulling it out and revisiting, what did that look like? Did we follow through on everything we committed to? Kind of on a funny note, I remember writing job offer letters that would say you can and will be expected to work overtime, you know, if the company needs you. And I remember several times having employees come and they'd sign that job offer letter, and several times 6 months in, well, you never told me I had to work overtime. Oh, funny, I did, you know, and it's not a I told you so type of thing, but that documentation can be very, very important as well. So get everybody, even if it's your, you know, your minimum wage employee, get them that written job offer. I think that most people kind of, especially new employees, if it's their first job, that's something they're kind of proud of too, having that job offer in hand. And last but not least, in that positive candidate experience, remember, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. We want to do every single thing we can. And it doesn't mean we're not going to mess up. I do it every single day. But hopefully I recognize it, or if someone brings it to my attention, I'm quick to thank them for bringing that to my attention and fix it as quickly as I possibly can. But you know, everything you do when you're looking at bringing on new people and you've got yourself out there in the community, that first impression is critical for people who are looking to join our organization. And it looks like we're just about on time. So, you know, that is definitely those things. I hope you've learned today how those things all tie together. You know, might your process be a little bit different? If you want to skip and do job descriptions at the end, go ahead. I've done it myself. It's painful, but it can be done. Doesn't mean that you might not have a smaller job description. You know, you're integrating it throughout that process, but please make sure that you're focusing on that job description, your hiring process, and your onboarding process. And thank you for having me today. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rhonda. So real quick, we're going to jump into the chat room and see if there are any questions, or if questions are coming up just now, feel free to type them in. Right now, though, I do see we have a supporting comment from Kim at DOG Kalispell. And she said, for the communicate often bullet point, consider also importance of defining the desired or preferred mode of communication, especially with all the different tools we have today, phone, text, email, online chat, et cetera, having no structure to communication can really become overwhelming. Too many places to monitor and backtrack in. For instance, we've started utilizing the emoji response versus a text-based response. For instance, to confirm you read a message, simply thumbs up it for confirmation versus any text response. This text is just one more ding or another thing to read, another chore to stay on top of. How do you feel about that, Rhonda?
I think that's absolutely pertinent. And I'm embarrassed that I don't have that in here, because that is critical. Many people, and I don't want to pick on our older generation, but they're not into texting. If you text them, they might not even know. So asking people, what's your preferred method of communication? Do you want an email? Do you want a text message? Or do you prefer a phone call? I think that's very, very a great point to make.
Thank you. Another question here is, can we create a more generic minimal job description and build on it as needed?
Absolutely. And that will happen, especially if it's a brand new position in an organization. Let's say that you're creating something brand new and you don't really know what you're going to have that person doing. Maybe you have 5 bullet points. If you have less than 5, I would really question, do you really need to fill that role? But at least those 5 bullet points, and letting that candidate know, though, this is a very fluid position. It's brand new. We're going to build on it. You get to help us build this position. You know, how do you feel about that? And they may say, no, I like really specific direction. I need to know what I'm going to be doing, or this is great. I love the challenge of helping you build this position in your organization. The one caution I would have with that is making sure that you're checking on it frequently. Maybe it's every week. You're sitting down during that first month and looking, okay, what did you do this week? You know, what did you do this week? Should that be in this position description, or should somebody else be doing that? Just make sure you stay on top of it. So a year from now or 2 years from now, when that person leaves, and you go, wow, what were you, you know, what does that position description look like? Oh, we don't know. So make sure that you're maintaining it and constantly updating it.
Great. So another question here is new employee orientation the same thing as onboarding?
It is not, and a great question. So many times you'll hear those words used interchangeably, but they aren't the same thing. Onboarding really starts before that person comes on board and goes long after their first day. Typically, a new employee orientation, which I love new employee orientations, are that first day. What does that first day look like? And it might start with that message from the CEO that talks about the history of the company, and you know, depending on, do you hire every single week or do you have a once a month hiring event? What does that look like? But it's structured. We talk about safety. We cover the new employee handbook. Anybody guilty of just handing out that handbook and hoping that everybody read it? I always say hope is not a strategy. So don't assume. We know what happens when we assume that they did read it. So we go through that handbook, as painful as it might be. We might talk a little bit about the benefits. We talk about, you know, some of the different things. And I like to bring in all the department managers, if at all possible, and just have them do a brief introduction, whatever that might look like. Might be a full day, might be an hour, might be half a day. Start small, don't overwhelm yourself, and that can grow, but it is not the same thing as the onboarding.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually can see how that would have been confused. Before I had the opportunity to learn more, I was definitely thinking they were pretty much one and the same. Another question, kind of in left field here. Can you say if there's a newest or maybe even still reoccurring common mistake that you see employers making, especially now in this COVID era?
Well, I think I touched on it a little bit. My biggest thing is references, just not checking that that potential candidate, not checking their past work history. We go through a lot of time and energy bringing new people on board, and I always say hire the right people. This may sound crass, but we talk about, you know, in the HR world, oftentimes hire slow, fire fast. Terminating is not fun. If they're not working out, don't hang on, you know, depending on what that looks like. But it really comes down to, what did their past employment history look like? Looking at, you know, talking about gaps in employment, checking those references. If there is no reference information, that should be a red flag. And I don't want to say that I'm untrusting, but I usually put all my red flags up and I lower them as I meet those milestones. Great, we've got 3 references. What about that person though who's never worked before? What do those references look like? I do HR for a large restaurant group, 5 restaurants in 3 different states. And many times those employees come in and that's their first job. They're in high school, they don't have any references. Well, let's talk to a coach. Let's talk to a teacher, somebody that can verify your character. You know, do you turn your homework in on time? So you can find references. If you want that job bad enough, employees will come up with that. So that's the one thing that I say, do not skip that. And I think most employers intend to do it, but what happens? We call, we don't get an answer, we leave a message, they don't call back, we're in a big hurry, so we just bring them in. We do intend to get back to it, but we don't. And more often than not, you'll look back and go, yeah, I did find out later that that's what happened at their past employer, or whatever the case may be.
Thank you. So we have one final question today from Bree Hansen, and she's asking, how do you check previous work references with their previous employers, only when their previous employers only give you name, rank, and serial number?
Right, and we all are, again, I'm speaking to my fellow HR professionals, we're very careful about what information that we do share. If anything else, verify those dates of employment. I forgot what the statistic is of how many people are not truthful on an application, but verify the dates of employment and at least ask, are they eligible for rehire? A lot of times if it's a large corporation, you can't get through to anybody. Try to get manager information or somebody that can vouch for that information. You're going to have to do a little more investigative work, but don't skip it. It's important.
Great. Thank you so much. And if there are any last minute questions that are coming in, go ahead and type them in. We've got just a few minutes left for the Q&A time. And if nothing else, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. And a big thank you to Ronda Wakefield for giving her time and sharing her expertise on this topic with us today. Following a few announcements, we will leave up Ronda's contact information in case you have any further questions for her. We look forward to your attendance at our October Blueprint for Business Success seminar, Human Rights During COVID-19, with Andrea Harden, and the November seminar, Performance Management, It's All About the Communication, with Deb Broadbent. Job Service Kalispell has also started an online job fair using Zoom. This is held the last Wednesday of every month at noon. If you are hiring and would like to connect with job seekers, please contact Job Service Kalispell at 406-758-6200 to participate as an employer in one of our upcoming job fairs. As a reminder, there will be an anonymous 2-minute survey that pops up when you leave today. Your participation will help us improve this program and provide meaningful topics and content. Thank you again for attending.